Welcome back, everyone, to Einstein's Eyes, our YouTube channel. I'm Carl Rosen, oculoplastics in Anchorage, Alaska. Fellowship trained in neuro-ophthalmology as well, although I don't do as much of that any longer. And my friend and colleague, Jon Ditkoff in New Jersey, cornea specialist, fellowship trained. John's, you're up, say hello.
Hello, guys. I'm coming today. I'm in actually New York City. I'm in
That's right.
Manhattan, and but my practice is in New Jersey, and I've been there for 29 years. And Einstein Eyes is a great creation by Carl, hence where we both trained, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and we did our residency there in ophthalmology.
Right.
Then I did cornea, and he's an oculoplastic guru.
Right. Thanks,
Well,
John.
today we're talking business. We're not talking medical care.
Right. Today we're gonna talk about private equity, how it affects ophthalmology practices, medicine in general, issues about cost containment, leverage buyout. In fact, I'm going to talk about the theory behind private equity, and John will talk about how it directly impacts or affects ophthalmology practices and what it's doing to healthcare in general as a policy matter. So you can think about private equity as limited partnerships, general management. These guys oversee funds that come in, they create this private equity firm, and they have all this capital that they want to deploy to various places. We're specifically going to focus on ophthalmology practices. And so they make it very interesting and enticing for older guys that have actually built a successful ophthalmology practice. So let's say you're there for 25, 30 years, you have a nice practice, you're well known in the community, you have a nice referral network, and somebody comes in and they look at your EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization. The concept I want to get across on this YouTube video is leverage buyout and why it's so interesting and why the PE firms use this technique or this financial instrument to, in a way, fool the doctor and the practice into thinking they're getting a better deal than they get. But I'm not sure I actually want to drill down on this, because again, your goals and each practice's goals and each doctor's goals are different than another doctor's goals or another practice's goals. And you have to look at the structure. Do you have young people? Do you have older people? The region, the network, referral patterns, etc. But leverage buyout essentially uses the practice's assets as a debt instrument. And the way that's done, when you calculate it, your yield, your return on your investment is markedly improved using leverage buyout and debt, because instead of dropping $100 million on a practice, and if the return, the EBITDA is 10 million per year, that's a 10% return or yield yearly. If you just put down 9 million and borrow, or you put down 10 million and borrow 90 million, the money you get back is a much greater yield, and you use the money to pay back the debt with interest payments, obviously, to the lender or to the bank. And I won't go into the specifics, but the yield is far greater and your risk is far less. The loan is secured by the lender or the bank against the assets of the practice. And that's where leverage buyout is so interesting. The PE firm, then, their debt decreases each year as they make payments to their lender or to the bank, and their equity position increases so eventually they have 100% ownership. And it's a very interesting way. Again, leverage buyout, you're securing debt to the assets of the practice, which is a beautiful thing for the PE firm, but maybe not so much for the practice. So really, that was my point, and that's the instrument or the way the PE firm, the general partners in that firm, manage their capital. And they de-risk themselves. They add risk to the practice and to the senior partner, again, based on that debt financing from the practice assets. It's very interesting. It's a little complicated if you're not used to it, but that's the structure of the PE firm, and experience with PE coming into my practice as well as the surgery center. And my partners rejected it. We did not want to go that route because you lose your control, your management changes. You know, the pros are, well, you could just focus on patient care, but that's not really all we're in it for. We, you know, folks that are in private practice actually like managing, like handling business, negotiating, making deals. But, you know, the pros are that PE firms, you know, do have much more leverage with insurance companies and can raise the price. And this is where cost containment or lack thereof plays a role. So, John, why don't you explain the more granular aspect of PE?
So what I would talk about on this video, and then we could always do it, I would do a second video. I mean, if it's okay with you, Carl.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where we talk about how they analyze and what it looks like in real terms, because I've had many people go through it. I've met with them like you. But I think what I would talk about in this video is exactly what you were talking about, is this leverage buyout. So I know of practices, for example, I mean, I can't say the name of the practice, but there's a large practice near me, not ophthalmology, that was about 15 offices, medical care, and they use leverage buyout the way you described to purchase this practice. There's two things I would talk about in this video, which is number one, I grew up, my dad's a doctor. I have two brothers that are physicians. I wouldn't say the average physician is the sharpest businessman or has the acumen to analyze what you just described. You know, leverage buyouts, you know, like loans and using money from a bank to make money. That's not our expertise. However, I would bring up that our expertise is keeping costs down, getting to know our staff, getting the most out of our day, and keeping profits tight, running a tight ship. And I think the mistake that a lot of PE firms have made, and the example I'm talking about is this medical practices, they think they're going to come in and run your practice better. They're going to somehow save money. They think we're all, I shouldn't say it, they think a lot of doctors are not finance people. And they're right to some extent, but not when it comes to the day-to-day. So they come in thinking there's all this fluffy overhead, there's all this stuff they can cut. And in this practice I was just referring to with 15 offices, guess what happened? The PE firm went bankrupt. They couldn't afford to pay the loan. And my friend's practice was owned by a bank, like your house would be if you defaulted on a mortgage. Now, it worked out for him. He had a lot of money up front, but at the end of the day, it wasn't really the right fit for him. So that's number one. But the second part is exactly that. How can a PE firm do better than a medical practice? And that's the other part I would talk about in this video, which is there is some benefit. There's clearly a benefit. If they're big enough and they're that strategic and they're that finance oriented, which as doctors we're not always trained to be, they can get better rates. So I think if you're a doc out there and you're thinking about PE, I know people that are in medical practices that are being paid pennies on the dollar in New Jersey because the insurance companies are so powerful. So they're paying you 40%, 50% of Medicare rates. By joining this large PE firm, they're getting 100% Medicare rates. They're not getting to keep it, the doctor. But what happens is the PE firm takes 30, 40%. They pay the doctor a little bit more than he used to make. He's happy. She's happy because they're working the same hours. They're dealing with less headaches. And they see that for every patient they see, they're getting more money, even though they don't get to keep it all. They're sharing it with the PE firm. They see that they're being paid more for their time. Right. So that is the only way. So if you're ever approached by a PE firm, in my opinion, whether it's for a surgery center, for your office, or any other modality, they've got to show you how they're going to bring in more revenue per RVU, which is your ability to work. They have to bring you more money per encounter so they can afford to pay you and them to make money.
Right.
If they don't have a strategy, they're not going to do well.
Right, John. So the model breaks down
Yeah,
if you're
they
not
can't,
making, if your EBITDA is not the same every year, or if it goes
right?
down. Now they're assuming, and this is that second bite of the apple that everybody talks about, and they're very gleeful and they're grinning of how well they did. But in actual fact, it's not easy to, again, consolidate in a region that may be saturated or that has competing practices, and then use whatever leverage this PE firm has to increase the EBITDA on a yearly basis. And that's where the system breaks down, because if your EBITDA goes down, now everything gets squished, everything gets squashed, and then all of a sudden smiles become frowns. So
And I've seen both. I've
yeah,
seen some very happy doctors
yeah,
that, to be honest, it's been more internists. I think the internists were being squeezed so much by the insurance companies,
yeah,
they couldn't afford to practice medicine and like the
yeah,
way they wanted.
yeah,
And by joining large entities, they got much better rates. They're
yeah,
able to do what they were doing before. They're not making more,
yeah,
and they really didn't even care that much about the multiple. They didn't get
yeah,
that much money, but
yeah,
they're able to keep practicing medicine.
yeah. To
But
me,
I think,
yeah,
yeah,
this is
I think
guys that they're really at the end of the rope, and they're really looking for an exit. That's my impression, um, from my community, because we've had a bunch of PE come up here. But there's a real policy issue, a healthcare policy issue with the cost containment, because what happens is that the total overall costs tend to go up. So
because they're
these
getting better rates. They
right, so
negotiate better with the insurance
right.
companies.
And so their investors in that PE firm, their limited partners in that PE firm are happy, but at what cost? And, to the community and to healthcare costs in general. It's not containment, in my view.
Right. So we're gonna talk on another video that about exactly that, how it affects the patient.
Yeah,
Because I've seen that in New Jersey. I'm sure you've seen it in Alaska.
yeah,
And the second part is to kind of go through a scenario, what they really give you.
yeah,
And does it make sense for a 30-year-old doctor, a 70-year-old doctor, 50-year-old?
yeah. Well, it's tough on a 30-year-old who just came out of residency.
Yeah.
So those
And
guys,
many of them are not, either because they're not interested or there's not availability, ownership potential.
right. So a lot of these guys, they decide to work for the hospital rather than for a private practice. And private practice, it's just not many of us around anymore, you know. But so John,
But we're gonna talk, I mean, I
yeah,
definitely have more information.
yeah, we'll talk about that. I think maybe we'll bring on another guest or so, but this is a really interesting topic. This starts to get into healthcare policy analysis and cost containment and things like that. So, but we'll jump in on that. And I want to thank our audience again, for listening. We really appreciate it. We're going to have another video, a YouTube video.